Thank you, Ruston. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually the first time I've been to this conference, so it's a real pleasure to be here. First impressions, a very lively atmosphere I pick up, both in the hall and around and about, and some pretty thought-provoking sessions. Particularly positive one, I thought, this morning on automatic enrolment. I'll come back to that later in my speech. I'm conscious that quite a number of people place quite a lot of store by what the regulator does or does not say. So just to let you know, we'll be putting a copy of this speech on our website shortly after we've finished. So, I'm indeed delighted to be here this afternoon. I'm speaking to you all as the new-ish, after 6 months, chair of the Pensions Regulator. I've now been in post for 6 months. Now, I don't need to tell you all, rather a lot has happened over the last 6 months. Just to put that in perspective, I actually was offered my job by Steve Webb and signed the contract a week before George Osborne's budget speech. That's what I call timing. The work of the regulator, clearly, is to deliver quality outcomes for retirement savers, working hand in hand with the industry. And this, at this time of seismic change that we're going through, this really is more important than ever. So I see it as my role to ensure that the regulator plays its part fully in helping with the successful implementation of these very fundamental changes, and in due course, in then building on them to improve retirement provision for the longer term in this country. Over the next 25 minutes or so, I'll be talking to you about the strategic direction we're taking on our priority areas: DB funding, DC quality, automatic enrolment, tackling pension scams, and of course, some of the work that we're doing to support the major pension changes I've just alluded to. What each of these areas have in common for us is the consistent approach that we take, with our statutory task being to educate, to enable, and, where required, to enforce. The regulator's statutory objectives, to promote good governance and administration, to protect pension savers and the PPF, to maximise employer compliance with automatic enrolment, and our new employer sustainable growth objective, these are all well publicised, but I'll be referring to them as I move through my talk. But before I turn to our regulatory agenda, I'd like to touch on 2 topical items: the appointment of a permanent chief executive at the regulator and the issue of a single regulator of pensions. The chief executive is an extremely important role as we usher in so much change, and it is crucial that we find the right person for the job. That's why, when I joined the regulator, I decided to pause the process that was already in train in order to take some time to have a really good look at what the organisation needs and to understand the qualities required for the role. Now, as many of you will know, a thorough recruitment process is now fully underway, and although I clearly can't go into any detail at this stage, I want to be in a position to announce our permanent chief executive before the end of the year. I'd also like to briefly address the question of a singles pensions regulator, which continues to raise its head, including yesterday afternoon. I understand why this issue gets raised. Although our policy objectives are derived from DWP legislation, in order to make these work in practice, we have to maintain a strong working relationship with the rest of the regulatory community. From my perspective, we already have a good strategic collaboration with both the FCA and the PRA. But we've recently taken steps to ensure even clearer alignment with each of them. We share a common purpose of driving up standards and protecting the interests of retirement savers. And plenty of effort goes on behind the scenes to make sure we take a joined-up approach. If the time becomes right to look again at these issues, we'll be happy to engage in any discussions. But it's for ministers to decide the regulatory architecture of UK pensions. And ministers have made it clear that any government review is not a matter for this Parliament. So, with those preliminary comments, let me turn to defined benefits, DB. The turbulent financial markets, combined with a longer living workforce, has given employers a great deal to think about. Striking the right balance between business growth, dividends, and the funding of pension schemes remains challenging. The new objective that we've been given, to minimize any adverse impact on employer growth, has brought a new focus to our approach. This is clearly of considerable interest to ministers, corporates, and of course to many of you. And we're working hard to ensure that the policy objectives translate into meaningful changes. Indeed, I think that my own background that Rustin referred to in corporate finance is of particular relevance in helping strike this right balance. We believe that our new DB code and regulatory strategy represent a common sense approach. It's been generally welcomed, and the principles at its heart, trustees and employers working collaboratively together, taking a longer-term view and managing risks appropriately, should support the interests of all parties concerned. Our new code strengthens what many schemes are already doing. We are aware, however, that some take inappropriate levels of risk. For others, there has been a reluctance to take risks. We're being clear that as long as risks are fully thought through and managed, then appropriate risk-taking can benefit both the scheme and the sponsoring employer. The final DB code owes much to the collaborative process. The NAPF was one of many groups which responded to our consultation and which worked closely with us in developing and improving the code, making it tighter, shorter, and more workable. Our case teams have undergone a program of extensive training to ensure the code and its principles are translated into consistent working practices. We've also updated the DB materials on our website and the trustee toolkit, and are working to raise awareness of the key messages of the code amongst trustees and employers, particularly with those who, shall we say, have been less engaged with our guidance in the past. We've organised a number of workshops to support trustees and employer sponsors, helping them to understand and to apply this new code, as well as listening closely to their thoughts, concerns, and experiences. I'm pleased to say the response we've had to this has been extremely positive. Attendance has been oversubscribed. I actually attended one of the workshops last week in London. We had more than 100 trustees and administrators there, and was really interested to hear so many experiences and points of view from them during the event. I was impressed by the wealth of knowledge and expertise in the room, and it made for some pretty lively debate and discussions, as well as bringing to life the very real challenges that employers and trustees face in managing the funding of their own schemes. We're going to put the workshop materials on the website in due course, as well as producing a webinar for those who were unable to attend any of the events. We're now reflecting on how the sessions went, taking stock of the comments made, the feedback given, and looking to see what more we can do, what further tools and guidance we can give for the future. The outcome of these events and of our ongoing industry engagement will help us hone our messages to trustees and to scheme sponsors to help them understand the code and what it is that we're asking of them. Again, educate and enable. But we also enforce. We take regulatory action where necessary when other options are exhausted through the exercising of our powers. This brings me to the recent successful outcome of the Lehman Brothers settlement. This was a very hard-fought case involving a number of international legal challenges over a full 6-year period, and with the result that the scheme will receive £184 million and will avoid entering the PPF. 2,500 members are expected to receive their full retirement benefits. But most of our successes are not as visible. Other settlements in cases where we've either issued a financial support direction or begun the regulatory process by issuing a warning notice have also resulted in recoveries of just under £500 million, showing our determination and tenacity to use our powers to achieve positive outcomes. I'll make a number of mentions of the pensions freedoms announced in the budget. These include the continued ability to move from a DB to a DC scheme, allowing DB members the same flexibilities that DC savers will have at retirement, such as taking their whole pension pot in cash or entering drawdown. This clearly has implications for DB schemes, so we intend to consult on some changes on our transfer guidance sometime early in the new year. However, our view has always been that in the vast majority of cases, it is better for members to stay in a DB scheme than to transfer out. In any case, individuals should always receive completely independent professional advice before making a transfer decision. We expect employers to follow the Voluntary Industry Code on incentivised transfers, and we will continue to work with the industry and the FCA to monitor developments. And that brings me to defined contribution, DC. Even before the budget, changes in the DC landscape were already happening at great speed, with DC scheme assets set to double over the next 15 years to an estimated £800 billion, thanks in part to the introduction of automatic enrolment. But the pension reforms announced in, and indeed since the budget, have created a radically changed landscape. We are working with the government, with the FCA and wider industry to facilitate this ambitious programme of reform. What this means in practice is providing DWP in particular with an idea of what the implementation of these policies might look like from a regulatory perspective. Now, I am acutely aware of the amount of change that the industry is having to deal with. For our part, we'll be providing guidance in the new year to help trustees through the changes in managing their responsibilities once the detail of the new provisions is certain. In the meantime, we will continue to regulate against our DC code and will be updating it to reflect whatever changes in legislation follow. The focus of our DC work has been on, and will continue to be, driving up standards of governance and administration and improving on scheme quality. We believe that these are the specific areas where we can influence as regulator in order to achieve objectives related to improved outcomes for retirement savers. The government's minimum governance standards and charge cap will take effect from April next year. There's still a challenge to help employers, trustees, and members gauge whether their scheme is delivering good value compared to others in the market. They all need to be able to compare easily the costs and charges being deducted from members' DC funds with the quality of service received from the provider. Value for money, as was being discussed yesterday afternoon, will be a key issue for the ongoing debate. In our DC regulatory guidance, published last year, we set out initial steps for trustees to take in order to assess whether the costs and charges deducted provide good value in relation to the benefits and services provided. Again, we will continue to work with the DWP, the FCA, and the wider industry on these issues in the coming months. But clearly, there is a lot of work still to be done. Good communications will play a pivotal role, not only in providing guidance to help people through the changes, but also in trying to create a world where people understand the pensions landscape better and take an active interest in their own financial futures. Again, educate and enable, the foundation of our approach. I'd now like to talk about automatic enrolment, or AE, and the challenges ahead. To date, AE has undoubtedly been a success. Over the last couple of years, nearly 28,000 employers have completed their declaration of compliance. More than 4.7 million workers have been enrolled. 99% of large employers have successfully staged and seen low opt-out rates of around 9% for that same large employer cohort. It is a very big achievement. And it's good to have that recognised by the industry and indeed from across the political spectrum. But clearly, there are some very major challenges ahead. The sheer volume of people still to go through the AE process is immense. Over 1.5 million employers to stage between 2015 and 2018. 1.5 million. At the regulator, we are doing all we can to highlight to employers and advisors what they need to do and how to go about it. Our research and feedback has told us that if employers give themselves enough time, we believe 12 months is a realistic time frame, then they should be able to complete their process, work through any problems, and still meet their staging date. We know that crucial to achieving this is good communication and collaboration. We've had to become more creative in our approach, using different channels to access our target audiences. So, for the first time, we're using national and regional TV and radio advertising to deliver our messages, alongside printed press, social media, and online advertising. The message remains simple. If you are an employer, you will have AE duties, and you need to go to our website to find out more. We've also been asking those who've gone through the process for feedback, looking at where problems have arisen. At the same time, we've been taking that on board, improving our website, educational tools, guidance literature, and language to help those about to start the process to understand better what they need to do. In fact, I was very encouraged by this morning's first session on automatic enrolment, where we had 3 small and medium-sized businesses on the platform. Not only are they embracing AE, but they also view our website as straightforward and even, quotes, not too scary. Not bad for a government website. So I am a great believer in keeping things simple. As a relative newcomer to the pensions world, I've been struggling to get to grips with some of the acronyms and jargons that are rife. Even after having spent a whole career in finance, if I'm finding things hard to understand, small and micro employers with little pensions experience are sure to find some of the jargon baffling. We all need, we were hearing this morning, there's an obligation on the regulator, on government, and on scheme providers. We all need to get much better at using plain English. As an example, we recently stopped using the term registration when talking to employers about what they have to do to complete their AE duties. We now use declaration of compliance. Not a huge change, perhaps, but a step in the right direction, which shows we were listening to the small and micro businesses who told us during research that this resonated much more strongly with them. In a similar way, we've taken on board people's comments about clarity and brevity of language in our DB code I referred to earlier, making sure we precisely reflect the wording of the new objective throughout so that there is no ambiguity in our approach. We're doing more work with advisors too. Our industry liaison team is speaking to IFAs, to bookkeepers and accountants, as well as software providers and payroll groups, helping them to understand what role they can play. We know that most employers want to do the right thing by their workers, their employees. Our research has found that employer attitudes towards AE remain positive, both in terms of feelings towards the reforms and employers' sense of their ability to comply with them. Our latest research found that over 2/3 of employers continued to believe that AE was a good idea. So far, for large and now medium employers, the signs are good. We expect to see that the vast majority will comply on time, and this will mean over 1 million more workers newly saving for their retirement. But, as I have mentioned, as well as educating and enabling, we are here to enforce. We have said that willful or persistent non-compliance will be met with enforcement action and penalties. We have a highly experienced team of investigators who are monitoring signs of non-compliance and who will act accordingly. We've just started to publish a quarterly compliance and enforcement bulletin, which includes figures on the number of occasions we've used our powers and flags up lessons from our casework so far. And we'll be publishing the next one on the 28th of October. So, as I've already said, AE has so far been a success. In the majority of cases, a nudge has been all that has been required. Most employers, when they have faced issues, they've come to us so that we can agree with them how to put right what has gone wrong. That is why over 99% of large employers have been compliant without us having to use our powers. Let me be clear, however. As the number of employers staging rises significantly, we expect to see corresponding increases in how often we need to use our statutory powers, such as compliance notices, fixed and escalating penalties. As we deal with smaller employers, we'll see more who, despite our message to prepare early, leave it too late or indeed don't comply at all. This type of non-compliance is not acceptable. That's why we've been given these powers, and we will use them where appropriate. This brings me on to pension scams and to our updated Scorpion campaign. You may have noticed that we changed the language from liberation to scams, as again, this word resonates much more clearly with people. I know many trustees here are extremely concerned by this issue and have faced some difficult situations where members have wanted to transfer their money into what could be a dubious scheme. Trustees have a very delicate and responsible role to play with what amounts to a person's future financial security. We estimate that at least £500 million has been lost to pension scams, and that figure could be the tip of the iceberg. There won't be many people in this room who haven't seen at first hand some of the techniques the scammers use. Unsolicited spam, text messages promising early access to pots, sales patter that talks of legal loopholes and cash bonuses, and even government endorsement. In fact, on the very day of the launch of our campaign in July, the actual man pictured on the front of our materials received a phone call from someone claiming to be able to help him access his pension pot before he was 55. Anyone who falls for these tactics will often find their monies disappear or be moved into dubious investment arrangements, and they will in many cases be subject to tax charges. This is an industry-wide problem, and we all have a part to play in trying to combat the scammers. We're acutely aware that in the new pensions freedom landscape, scammers are increasingly likely to encourage people to part with their cash for promises and schemes which fail to materialise. While it's possible to take action through the courts, there is often little chance that an individual's money will be recovered and returned to a legitimate scheme. As we have said before, there is no silver bullet that will put a halt to this. An increased level of public awareness is the best way to help people to protect themselves. And where possible, we'll work with partner agencies to bring the perpetrators to book. Disrupting scams at the point of transfer can be extremely effective, so schemes and providers should include our Scorpion material in their transfer packs and when they send members annual benefit statements and other literature. The more people that are aware, the more likely they are to recognise a scam and not get stung. Again, educate and enable. And what of the future for regulation? Well, as everyone is well aware, the next 6 months promises significant change for DC pensions. The guidance guarantee, charge caps, and so on. We've spent the last couple of days talking a lot about them. In addition, from April next year, the regulator will take on responsibility for setting the standards and overseeing the governance and administration for public service schemes. We'll be engaging with the scheme managers and pension boards to monitor how schemes are meeting requirements and to help them meet new standards. In a single step, this, along with the additional numbers coming in from AE, will more than double the number of pension scheme memberships for which we have a responsibility, from around 18 million to over 38 million. Looking beyond the next 6 months, and even beyond the general election next May, more changes on the horizon, including defined ambition or collective schemes, automatic transfers, and any changes resulting from the new Pensions Directive, the IORP Directive, not to mention the possible initiatives on scale and on independent trustees that we heard about yesterday. For many of these freedoms and changes, the precise role of the regulator is yet to be determined. However, in the meantime, we are actively collaborating behind the scenes with the DWP and others as they work through the issues. With regard to the new EU Pensions Directive, it's much too early in the process to assess the implications. Much will depend on how negotiations go over the next year, and we'll be supporting our partners in the government to help shape those discussions. Perhaps Gabriel will be able to shed some light on this in his piece tomorrow. But as an active member of IOPA, we will be in a position to provide direct input and technical expertise reflective of the UK pension regime to the EU's deliberations. Contribution levels. There's been considerable debate over whether current contribution levels will provide an adequate level of retirement income, and the NAPF has contributed towards that debate. DWP figures released in August estimate that almost 12 million people are not saving enough for retirement. There is much further to go in these debates. But what the government has done is to kickstart a cultural change to reverse the decline in retirement saving. Steve Webb and others have acknowledged that although AE is a very good start, more will need to be done to enable workers to build up adequate incomes at retirement. AE harnesses the natural inertia that stops many people from saving by turning it on its head. Initiatives such as the guidance guarantee are to be welcomed, but there has to be a combination of financial education and personal responsibility that will lead to people ultimately being able to fulfill their retirement expectations. Any further measures would, of course, be for future governments to consider. As to what type of savings ethos will emerge as a result of AE and the new pensions freedoms, this is a topic I expect to be the subject of further lively debate over coming months and indeed years. So, to conclude, clearly there is an enormous amount to do. I've arrived at a time of immense change, but also of potential for a real revolution across the retirement landscape. We will work with NAPF to support trustees, employers, and members to adjust to these changes and to reach good outcomes for retirement savers. As chairman of the pensions regulator, I want us to be known as an organisation with its finger on the pulse of market developments, whose behaviours and actions are consistent, fair, and in line both with our statutory remit and ministerial objectives. An organisation that listens both to the market and to its stakeholders, and is able to influence policy development and then to support policy implementation. The changes we are seeing are the start of a much longer journey towards improving retirement provision for generations to come. I intend to ensure that the pensions regulator continues to play an active role in helping these changes succeed. Thank you.